The wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Bitterroot Mountains in the autumn of 1859, drowning out the desperate cries of Sarah Blackwell as she watched the last wagon of her westbound caravan disappear around the mountain bend. 7 months. Pregnant, weakened by fever, and clutching only a small bundle of possessions, she collapsed onto the cold ground as the realization struck her. They weren't coming back. The wagon master had made his brutal calculation, one life sacrificed to save many. As darkness began to fall and the first snowflakes danced ominously in the fading light, Sarah heard a sound that made her blood freeze, wolves calling to each other in the distance. But it wasn't the wolves that would change her fate that night. It was the silent approach of a lone rider emerging from the forest, his silhouette unmistakably Lakota, his eyes fixed directly on her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months earlier, Sarah had boarded the westbound caravan in St. Louis with her husband Thomas, their hearts full of dreams about the Oregon Territory. Thomas Blackwell, a gifted carpenter whose reputation had spread through Missouri, had received a letter from his cousin describing the desperate need for skilled craftsmen in the growing settlements of the Northwest. "They're building entire towns from scratch," Thomas had told Sarah, his eyes bright with possibility as he showed her the letter. "A man with my skills could build a real legacy there." Sarah had hesitated. The 4-month journey across plains and mountains was daunting for anyone, but especially for a woman 5 months pregnant with their first child. Yet Thomas's enthusiasm was infectious, and the promise of their own homestead, perhaps even Thomas's own furniture shop someday, had eventually won her over. "We'll name our little one after the new land," Thomas had said, his hand resting gently on her growing belly. "Oregon Blackwell has a certain ring to it, don't you think?" Sarah had laughed, swatting his hand away. "We are not naming our child after a territory, Thomas Blackwell. Besides, what if it's a girl? Then she'll be the strongest, most independent girl in the Northwest," he had replied with that crooked smile that had first won Sarah's heart 3 years prior. The caravan that departed St. Louis that summer consisted of 12 wagons, led by a stern-faced wagon master named Everett Daniels. A veteran of 3 previous crossings, Daniels made his expectations painfully clear on their first night on the trail. "We move as one unit, no exceptions," he had announced as the travelers gathered around the campfire. "Anyone who can't keep up endangers everyone. I won't risk 28 lives for one." His eyes had lingered momentarily on Sarah's protruding belly, sending a chill through her despite the warm evening air. Thomas had squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Don't worry about old Daniels," he whispered. "He's just trying to scare the greenhorns. We'll be fine." And for the first 6 weeks, they were. The caravan made steady progress across the plains, establishing a comfortable rhythm of travel by day and community by night. Sarah had found friendship with Emma Winters, a young woman traveling with her husband to start a millinery shop in Oregon. "My mother thinks I'm crazy," Emma had confided one evening as they prepared dinner together. "Leaving civilization for the wilderness. But I told her mama that wilderness is going to be the next great civilization, and I aim to get there early." The women in the caravan had embraced Sarah, sharing remedies for her morning sickness and swollen ankles. The Miller sisters, spinsters in their 40s, who were joining their brother in Oregon, took particular interest in Sarah's pregnancy. "My sister delivered babies back in Pennsylvania for 20 years, Dorothea Miller had told Sarah proudly. "Rebecca can bring your little one into the world, safe as houses." Rebecca Miller had nodded solemnly. "I've delivered 217 babies, Mrs. Blackwell. Yours will be 218. The easy camaraderie of those early weeks had made the hardships of trail life bearable, the constant dust, the monotonous food, the lack of privacy. Even Wagon Master Daniels had softened somewhat, occasionally asking after Sarah's health during their evening meals. Everything changed at Fort Laramie. The military outpost, bustling with soldiers, traders, and native peoples from various tribes, had been their first glimpse of civilization after weeks on the trail. The caravan had planned a 3-day rest to replenish supplies, repair wagons, and allow everyone to enjoy simple luxuries like hot baths and fresh bread. On their second day at the fort, Thomas had joined a group of men from the caravan to help unload a shipment of lumber that had arrived for the fort's expansion. Sarah had watched from the shade of their wagon as her husband, ever eager to be useful, applied his carpenter's eye to organizing the chaotic pile of timber. "Your man's a hard worker," a soldier had commented, passing by with a water bucket. "He's never been one to sit idle," Sarah had replied proudly. The accident happened so quickly that many couldn't recall exactly how it occurred. A stack of heavy timber had shifted unexpectedly. Thomas, positioned beneath it while guiding another man's placement, never had a chance to move. The fort's doctor had arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. Thomas Blackwell had died instantly, his body crushed beneath the weight of the very material he had so skillfully worked with throughout his life. Sarah's world had collapsed, along with that pile of lumber. One moment, she was a woman with a husband and a future. The next, she was a pregnant widow with no home to return to, as they had sold everything to finance their journey westward. Wagon Master Daniels had approached her on the evening after Thomas's burial in the small cemetery outside Fort Laramie. His face, usually stern, had shown unexpected compassion. "Mrs. Blackwell, I want you to know the caravan will continue to Oregon as planned. Your husband paid the passage for both of you, and that seat in the miller's wagon is still yours if you want it." Sarah had stared at the simple wooden cross marking Thomas's grave, her mind struggling to process anything beyond her immediate grief. "What choice do I have?" she had whispered. "You could stay here at the fort," Daniels had suggested gently. "There are always families heading back east. Or you could wait until spring and join another westbound caravan." But the thought of returning to St. Louis, to face pitying looks from neighbors and the humiliation of starting over with nothing, had been unbearable. And waiting at Fort Laramie through a winter, a strange woman alone among soldiers and traders, seemed equally impossible. At least in Oregon, Thomas's cousin might offer some connection, some semblance of family. "I'll continue on," she had decided, her voice stronger than she felt. "It's what Thomas would have wanted." The caravan's dynamics had shifted after Fort Laramie. While most travelers remained kind, Sarah sensed a new wariness in their interactions. A widow, especially a pregnant one, represented a burden, a responsibility. No one had bargained for when joining the wagon train. Only the Miller sisters maintained their unwavering support, insisting that Sarah continue sharing their wagon. "We made a promise to deliver baby number 218, Dorothea had reminded her with forced cheerfulness, "and Millers never break their promises." The terrain had grown more challenging as they left the plains behind and entered the mountain ranges that guarded the approach to Oregon territory. Steep inclines forced everyone to walk beside the wagons rather than ride, reducing the oxen's burden. For Sarah, now 6 months pregnant and still weakened by grief, these climbs became increasingly difficult. Emma Winters had noticed her struggling one particularly steep morning. "Sarah, you're white as a sheet," she had said, taking her arm. "Let me help you back to the wagon. Surely Mr. Daniels won't object to you riding for one hill." But Daniels had objected, his earlier compassion apparently exhausted. "The oxen are struggling enough on these grades," he had said flatly. "Every pound matters. Mrs. Blackwell walks like everyone else." That night, Sarah had developed a cough. By morning, it had settled deep in her chest, making each breath painful. Rebecca Miller had mixed a poultice of herbs they'd gathered along the trail, applying it to Sarah's chest and back. "Just a trail cold," she had assured Sarah. "We've all had them. Rest today, and you'll feel better tomorrow." But Daniels had eliminated the planned rest day, citing the ominous clouds gathering over the mountain peaks ahead. "Snow comes early in these mountains," he had announced. "We need to clear Bitterroot Pass before the first storm, or we'll be trapped until spring." For 3 more days, Sarah had struggled to keep pace, her cough worsening, her body burning with fever. Emma and the Miller sisters took turns supporting her, sometimes practically carrying her up the steepest sections. Each night, she collapsed into exhausted sleep, only to be woken hours later by the call to continue the journey. On the 4th morning, Sarah couldn't rise from her bedroll. Rebecca Miller had placed a cool hand on her forehead and immediately turned to her sister with alarm in her eyes. "Fetch Mr. Daniels," she had whispered, "and bring my medicine bag." Through the fog of fever, Sarah had heard the wagon master's voice, sharp with irritation. "We're less than a day from the pass," he had said. "If we don't cross before that storm hits, we could lose everything. People, animals, wagons." "She needs rest," Rebecca had insisted. "Just 2 days. The fever will break and she'll be strong, enough to continue." 2 days could mean the difference between life and death for this entire caravan, Daniels had argued. "I won't risk everyone for one woman." Sarah had drifted in and out of consciousness as the debate continued around her. At some point, she became aware of being moved, of rough hands, placing her beneath a small stand of pines just off the trail. A water skin, a bundle of food, and her small pack of personal belongings had been set beside her. "The Miller women have left you medicines," Daniels had told her, his voice betraying a hint of shame beneath the practicality. "When you're stronger, follow the trail. Either you'll catch up, or you'll find a trapper's cabin about 5 miles ahead where you can shelter until help comes." "You're leaving me?" Sarah had asked, the reality finally penetrating her fever-addled mind. "We'll send help from the next settlement," he had promised, already backing away. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Blackwell, I truly am." And then they were gone, the last wagon disappearing around the bend as Sarah called weakly after them. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant howl of wolves sensing the coming night, and the first snowflakes beginning to fall from the darkening sky. Alone in the vast wilderness, Sarah Blackwell placed a protective hand over her swollen belly and whispered to her unborn child, "It's just you and me now, little one, just you and me." That was when she heard it, the soft crunch of approaching footsteps, too deliberate to be an animal. Summoning her remaining strength, Sarah turned toward the sound, her heart pounding with both fear and desperate hope. A tall figure emerged from the forest shadows. His long black hair was braided with leather thongs, his face marked with 2 red stripes across the cheekbones. He wore buckskin leggings and a blue wool shirt that had clearly come from a trading post. But the knife at his belt and the bow slung across his back marked him unmistakably as Lakota. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. The abandoned pregnant widow and the Lakota warrior, each assessing the unusual situation fate had created. Then, to Sarah's surprise, the man spoke in clear, though accented, English. "These people who leave you," he said, gesturing toward the empty trail. "They are not your family?" "Not anymore, it seems," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The warrior studied her for another moment, his dark eyes taking in her condition with a single sweep. Then he nodded, as if coming to a decision. "Night comes. Snow comes. The wolves come." He gestured to the mountains looming above them. "You will die here." Despite everything, Sarah felt a flash of defiance. "Perhaps," she managed, "but I'm not dead yet." Something shifted in the warrior's expression, a hint of respect, or perhaps surprise. He knelt down beside her, pressing a hand to her forehead. With unexpected gentleness. "Fever burns," he stated. "Child grows. Both need shelter." He stood again, looking toward the mountains where dark clouds were gathering intensity. "My people's winter camp lies 3 days' journey. A woman there knows medicine for fever and for bringing babies." Sarah stared up at him, trying to determine if this unexpected offer represented salvation or further danger. In the stories she'd heard throughout her life, native warriors were portrayed as savages to be feared. Yet this man's calm assessment of her situation and practical offer of help contained none of the menace she'd been taught to expect. "Why would you help me?" she asked, her suspicion tempered by desperation. The warrior's face remained impassive, but something flickered in his eyes, a memory, perhaps, or an old pain. "I am called Matthew Two Hawks," he said, offering his name as both introduction and answer. "Among my people, abandoning a woman with child would bring great shame. Your people's shame is not mine to carry, but neither will I leave you to die when I have the power to help." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah studied Matthew Two Hawks as he efficiently gathered her meager belongings. His movements were deliberate, economical, betraying none of the hesitation she felt. The decision before her seemed impossible. Trust her life and her unborn child's to a stranger from a people she had been taught to fear, or face certain death alone in the mountains as the snow began to fall. "How will we travel?" she asked, her voice stronger than she expected. "I can barely stand." Matthew secured her bundle to his belt before answering. "I have a horse hidden beyond those trees. She is strong enough to carry you." As if making her decision, the wind suddenly intensified, driving sharp, icy flakes against Sarah's face. The brewing storm would not wait for her doubts to resolve. "I accept your help," she said finally, "though I don't understand why you offer it." Matthew nodded once, then bent down. Before Sarah could protest, he had lifted her with surprising gentleness, one arm supporting her back, the other beneath her knees. She gasped, instinctively placing a protective hand over her belly. "Your fever makes you weak," he explained, already walking toward the tree line. "Save your strength for the journey ahead." The horse, waiting in the shelter of the pines, was not what Sarah had expected. Rather than the wild-looking pony she'd seen ridden by natives near Fort Laramie, this was a handsome chestnut mare with a U.S. cavalry brand partially obscured by a pattern burned over it. "She is called Willow," Matthew said, noting Sarah's inspection. "Cavalrymen do not always treat their horses well. Sometimes the horses find new riders." The implication was clear, but Sarah was in no position to question how Matthew had acquired his mount. He arranged a folded blanket on Willow's back before carefully lifting Sarah into place. "We must move quickly," he said, taking Willow's lead rope and starting up a narrow trail that branched away from the main wagon route. "The storm comes faster than expected." Sarah clutched Willow's mane for balance as they began their ascent. The mare moved with surprising sureness on the steep path, placing each hoof carefully despite the increasingly slippery ground. Matthew walked ahead, occasionally looking back to check on his unexpected charge. The storm intensified as they climbed higher into the mountains. Snow swirled around them, limiting visibility to mere yards. Sarah's fever made the cold even more unbearable, her body alternating between burning heat and bone-deep chills. Only the need to stay balanced on Willow kept her fully conscious. After what seemed like hours, Matthew stopped at a rock outcropping that created a small, sheltered overhang. "We rest here," he announced. "The pass ahead is dangerous in snow. Better to wait until morning." He helped Sarah down from Willow, supporting her weight as her legs threatened to buckle. The small shelter was barely large enough for both of them and the horse, but it cut the wind dramatically. Matthew worked quickly, clearing snow from the ground and arranging a bed of pine boughs before helping Sarah settle. From a pouch at his waist, he produced a small bundle of dried leaves, which he placed in a tin cup with snow. Using flint and steel, he started a tiny, smokeless fire of twigs and added the cup to it. "Medicine tea," he explained, "will help the fever." While the tea steeped, Matthew cared for Willow, removing her saddle pad and checking her hooves for ice buildup. The domesticity of these simple actions in such a wild setting struck Sarah as strangely comforting. "You speak English very well," she observed, trying to distract herself from the pain in her chest and the baby's restless movements. Matthew handed her the warm cup before responding. "I spent 3 winters at missionary school as a boy. The black robes thought they could change me." A hint of irony touched his voice. "They taught me their language, their numbers, their God. I learned what was useful." "And then you returned to your people?" "My father died. My mother needed her son, not a white man's shadow." He gestured to the mountains around them. "This world teaches different lessons." Sarah sipped the bitter tea, grimacing at the taste but welcoming its warmth. "What lessons?" "Survival," he replied simply. "Respect. Balance." He looked at her directly. "Your caravan master broke balance when he abandoned you. That creates debt." "And you feel obligated to settle that debt?" Sarah asked, beginning to understand his motivation. Matthew considered this. "Not obligation, choice. All things connect. How I act today shapes what comes tomorrow." The simplicity of this philosophy struck Sarah deeply. Since Thomas's death, she had been pushed and pulled by circumstances, reacting rather than choosing. Matthew's decision to help her, despite their different worlds, represented a kind of freedom she had forgotten existed. The medicine tea gradually eased her coughing, and the shelter's relative warmth allowed her to drift into the first restful sleep she'd had in days. She woke briefly during the night to find Matthew sitting alert at the shelter's entrance, his profile sharp against the snow-bright darkness, standing guard while she rested. The storm passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white, broken only by wind-swept rock faces. Dawn revealed a world both beautiful and treacherous. Matthew allowed Sarah to rest longer while he scouted the path ahead, returning with a handful of pine nuts and dried meat for their breakfast. "The pass is difficult but passable," he reported. "We must go slowly." Sarah felt marginally stronger after her night's rest, though the fever still burned beneath her skin. "I can ride on my own today," she insisted. Matthew studied her face, clearly doubtful but unwilling to challenge her directly. "As you wish, but there is no shame in accepting help when the trail is hard." They set out as the sun climbed higher, casting long blue shadows across the snow. The path narrowed as they ascended, sometimes disappearing entirely beneath snowdrifts that Willow had to push through. Matthew led the way, occasionally stopping to help the horse navigate particularly difficult sections. Sarah fought to stay upright in the saddle, each jolt sending pain through her swollen body. The baby seemed especially active today, perhaps responding to her anxiety or the constant movement. She placed a hand over a particularly sharp kick, wondering what Thomas would think of this strange journey their child was making, even before birth. "Your husband," Matthew said suddenly, breaking a long silence. "He walks with you still?" The question startled Sarah. "He died at Fort Laramie. An accident." Matthew nodded, as if confirming something. "I see him in your eyes when you look at nothing. In my people's understanding, those we love never truly leave." "The missionaries didn't change that belief?" Sarah asked, touched by his perception. "They tried." A rare smile briefly transformed his stern features. "Some truths go deeper than words." As midday approached, they reached the pass itself, a narrow gap between towering rock walls, where the wind had scoured away most of the snow, leaving treacherous ice in its place. Matthew helped Sarah dismount, judging it safer for both her and Willow to cross on foot. "Step only where I step," he instructed, taking her arm to support her. "The horse will follow." The crossing was hair-raising. Twice Sarah's feet slipped on hidden ice, and only Matthew's strong grip kept her from falling. Willow followed cautiously, her hooves occasionally sending small showers of ice crystals down the steep drop to their right. Halfway across, Sarah's strength began to fail. Her legs trembled with exertion, and the fever that had temporarily receded now returned with fresh intensity. She stopped, gasping for breath in the thin mountain air. "I need to rest," she admitted. Matthew's expression grew concerned as he took in her flushed face and labored breathing. Without discussion, he swept her into his arms again and continued forward, somehow maintaining his balance on the treacherous path while carrying her weight. "The worst is behind us," he said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Beyond the pass, the trail descends. We will reach the first valley by nightfall." Sarah wanted to protest being carried like a child, but her body betrayed her. Even breathing required all her concentration now. The fever was taking a greater toll than she had admitted. "The baby," she whispered, a new fear gripping her. "It's too early." Matthew's stride never faltered, but his arms tightened slightly around her. "My people's camp has a medicine woman. Swift Deer has brought many children safely into the world, even when the mothers were weak or the time was wrong. But will they help me? A white woman?" This question seemed to trouble him. "Some will object," he acknowledged. "Others will remember the white doctor who came when sickness spread through our winter camp 2 seasons ago. My mother's voice still carries weight among the council. She will speak for you." They cleared the pass by early afternoon, and as Matthew had promised, the descent was considerably easier than their climb had been. The air grew noticeably warmer as they dropped in elevation, and patches of exposed ground began to appear through the snow cover. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness. As the journey continued, vaguely aware of Matthew stopping occasionally to check her temperature or offer her water. The fever created strange waking dreams, where Thomas walked beside them, conversing amicably with Matthew about carpentry techniques and the best wood for cradle making. As dusk approached, they entered a sheltered valley nestled between protective mountain ridges. A small stream, not yet frozen despite the early winter weather, cut through the center of the valley floor. Near the stream's edge, Sarah glimpsed movement. A deer and her fawn, startled by their approach, bounded gracefully away. "We camp here tonight," Matthew announced, carefully setting Sarah down in a spot sheltered by a stand of cottonwood trees. "Tomorrow, we reach the lower valley where my people winter." He worked efficiently to establish their camp, creating another bed of pine boughs and lighting a small fire. The flames cast flickering shadows across his face as he prepared another batch of medicine tea. In the firelight, Sarah noticed for the first time a long scar that ran from his right temple down to his jaw, partially hidden by his hair. "How did you get that?" she asked, the fever making her bolder than she might otherwise have been. Matthew's hand went briefly to the scar. "A soldier who thought all Lakota looked the same," he replied, his tone matter-of-fact rather than bitter. "He was searching for someone who had taken horses from their fort. Were you the one who took them?" The question hung in the air between them, bridging 2 worlds with vastly different understandings of right and wrong, property and freedom. Matthew handed her the cup of medicine tea, his dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I took what was needed for my people to survive a hard winter," he said finally. "The soldier took something from me as well. We both carry the marks of that day." As night deepened around them, Sarah found herself wondering what other marks, visible and invisible, they each carried from their separate journeys through a shared land. Tomorrow would bring her to Matthew's winter camp, where she would face new challenges and unknown reception. But for tonight, in this quiet valley beneath the stars, They were simply two travelers sharing fire and story, the divisions of their worlds temporarily suspended. Morning arrived with a gentler face than the previous day. Thin sunlight filtered through the cottonwood branches, casting dappled patterns across Sarah's makeshift bed. She woke to find Matthew already preparing for their final day of travel, his movements methodical as he packed their few belongings. The night's rest and Matthew's medicine had slightly reduced her fever, though weakness still pervaded her limbs. When she attempted to rise, a sharp pain lanced through her lower back, causing her to gasp. Matthew was at her side immediately, his expression concerned. "The child moves toward its time?" "I don't think so," Sarah said, pressing a hand to her belly. The baby shifted beneath her touch, a reassuring movement. "It's just pain from riding." Nevertheless, Matthew insisted on examining her forehead again, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Fever is less, but still burns. We must reach the camp today." The urgency in his voice concerned Sarah more than her own discomfort. "How far?" "Half a day's journey if we move steadily." He helped her to her feet, supporting her until she found her balance. "There is a valley that opens to the north. My people make their winter camp beside the sheltered waters." As they prepared to depart, Sarah noticed Matthew scanning the ridge behind them, his posture suddenly alert, like a deer sensing danger. "What is it?" she asked. "Tracks in the fresh snow," he replied, his voice low. "Someone followed our trail from the pass." A chill that had nothing to do with her fever ran through Sarah. "The caravan?" "No." Matthew's expression hardened. "Boot prints, military style. 3 men, moving quickly." The implication hung between them, unspoken, but clear. Soldiers rarely ventured this deep into the mountains, especially after an early snowfall, unless they were tracking something, or someone. "Your horse," Sarah realized aloud. "They're looking for Willow." Matthew nodded grimly. "Or for me." He quickly helped Sarah mount and gathered their remaining supplies. "We must move faster than planned." They set out immediately, following the stream's winding path through the valley floor. Where yesterday they had traveled carefully, now Matthew set a more urgent pace, frequently glancing behind them. The jarring movement aggravated Sarah's pain, but she bit her lip and focused on staying upright in the saddle. As the morning progressed, the valley gradually widened, the steep mountain walls giving way to gentler slopes covered with pine and aspen. In other circumstances, Sarah might have found the landscape breathtaking. Now, each open space felt like exposure, each rustling branch a potential threat. "Tell me about your people's winter camp," she said, partly to distract herself from discomfort and partly to break the tense silence that had fallen between them. Matthew scanned the ridgeline once more before answering. 23 lodges. This season, less than before, some families chose to accept the government agent's offer of reservation land near the fort. But your family didn't. A muscle tightened in his jaw. "My grandfather is White Eagle, one of our band's eldest council members. He says when a wolf offers you meat, you should ask which part of you he plans to eat next." The bitterness in his voice surprised Sarah. The Matthew she had come to know over the past day was measured, pragmatic. This flash of anger revealed deeper currents. "The government hasn't honored its treaties," she acknowledged quietly. Matthew glanced at her sharply, perhaps surprised by her understanding. "You know this?" "My father was a teacher before he died. He believed education should include uncomfortable truths, not just convenient ones." Sarah shifted painfully in the saddle. "He corresponded with a missionary who documented broken promises to the eastern tribes." A thoughtful silence fell between them as they continued through a stand of aspen trees, their bare branches forming a lattice against the pale sky. When they emerged into a clearing, Matthew suddenly raised his hand, signaling Willow to stop. Ahead, the valley narrowed again before opening into what Sarah assumed was their destination. But Matthew's attention was fixed on something else. A thin spiral of smoke rising from a copse of trees about half a mile to their right. "Is that your camp?" Sarah asked. "No." Matthew's voice was taut. "My people would not make fire where it can be seen from above." He studied the smoke for a long moment before coming to a decision. "We must avoid the main trail. There is another, way longer but safer." He led Willow off their path and into denser forest, where snow lingered in patchy drifts beneath the canopy. The going became considerably slower as they navigated around fallen logs and through tight spaces between trees. For Sarah, each step Willow took now sent waves of pain through her lower back and abdomen. As they traversed a particularly steep section, Sarah felt a sudden rush of warm liquid between her thighs. Horror washed through her as she realized what was happening. "Matthew!" she called, her voice strangled with fear. "Something's wrong. I think the baby is coming." He turned back, alarm flashing across his normally composed features. With quick efficiency, he helped her down from Willow and onto a bed of pine needles. Sarah clutched her belly as another wave of pain, sharper than before, took her breath away. "Too early," she gasped when the contraction passed. "It's too early." Matthew knelt beside her, his hands hovering uncertainly for perhaps the first time since she'd met him. "How early?" 6 weeks, maybe 7. Tears of fear and pain blurred her vision. "It's the fever, the journey." Another contraction gripped her, stronger than the last. When it subsided, Matthew had already made his decision. "We cannot reach the camp in time. The baby comes now." He looked around, assessing their surroundings with new urgency. "There is a place nearby. Old hunting shelter, better than open forest." He lifted her again, this time with even greater care, and whistled for Willow to follow. Sarah clung to him, terrified by the speed of her labor and the knowledge that her baby's survival, her own survival, now depended entirely on this man. From a world so different from her own, the hunting shelter proved to be a low structure built against a rock face, its entrance nearly hidden by overgrown bushes. Inside, it was surprisingly dry and large enough for both of them to sit upright. Matthew quickly laid out their blankets and helped Sarah into this makeshift birthing bed. "I will gather what is needed," he said, his voice deliberately calm. The medicine woman taught all warriors basic birthing knowledge for emergencies on hunting parties. As he turned to leave, Sarah grabbed his wrist, suddenly afraid to be alone. "The soldiers following us." "Will follow the main trail to the smoke," he assured her. "We are well hidden here." Left alone, Sarah tried to focus on her breathing as another contraction built and crested. The fever made everything hazy, reality blurring at the edges. She thought of Rebecca Miller and her promise to deliver Sarah's baby. She thought of Thomas, who would never see his child. She thought of her own mother, who had died bringing Sarah into the world. When Matthew returned, his arms full of materials gathered from the forest, Sarah was in the grip of another powerful contraction. He waited until it passed before showing her what he had collected. Certain plants she didn't recognize, strips of bark, clean snow in a container made from folded birch bark. "For pain," he explained, crushing some leaves between his fingers and steeping them in melted snow. "For bleeding after. For cleaning the baby." His knowledge and preparedness provided surprising comfort. As her labor progressed rapidly, too rapidly, Sarah feared, Matthew remained steady, offering the herbal tea for pain, supporting her back when she needed to change positions, speaking in a low, even voice that anchored her through each wave of pain. "The child is eager to see the world," he observed during a brief respite between contractions. "Strong spirit." "Or foolish," Sarah managed through gritted teeth as another contraction began building. "Like its mother, traveling across mountains." While pregnant, a rare smile flickered across Matthew's face. Strong and foolish together make courage. The labor intensified as afternoon shadows lengthened. Sarah lost track of time, her world narrowing to the rhythm of pain and brief recovery. Matthew remained a constant presence, his hands sure when they needed to be, his voice a steady guide. "The baby comes now," he said finally, positioning himself to help. "With the next pain, you must push." What followed was a blur of sensation and effort. Sarah channeled all her remaining strength into bringing her child into the world, driven by instinct more ancient than civilization. Matthew's calm instructions penetrated the haze of pain and exhaustion, giving her something to focus on beyond her fear. When the final moment came, it happened with startling swiftness. A last, powerful contraction, an indescribable pressure, and then release, followed immediately by a thin, angry cry that filled the small shelter. "A daughter," Matthew announced, his voice reflecting wonder despite his efforts at stoicism. Small but strong, he wrapped the tiny, squirming infant in the cleanest cloth they had and placed her on Sarah's chest. Through eyes blurred with tears and fever, Sarah beheld her daughter for the first time. A miniature face still red and wrinkled from birth, impossibly small hands clenched into determined fists, a wisp of dark hair plastered to her forehead. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching the baby's cheek with trembling fingers. "You've chosen quite an entrance." While Sarah marveled at her daughter, Matthew efficiently addressed the afterbirth and prepared more of his herbal remedies. The practiced ease of his movements suggested this was indeed something all Lakota warriors learned, though Sarah suspected few had ever needed to use the knowledge to deliver a white woman's baby in a hidden hunting shelter. As night began to fall outside their sanctuary, Sarah felt the weight of what had happened settling upon her. She had given birth far from any settlement, aided only by a man her society would consider a savage, to a premature infant whose chances of survival in these conditions were precarious at best. Yet looking down at her daughter's face, now peaceful, in sleep after her first nursing, Sarah felt an unexpected flicker of hope ignite within her fever-weakened body. They had made it this far against all odds. Perhaps, with Matthew's continued help, they might yet reach the safety of his peoples. "Camp, she needs a name," Matthew said quietly, breaking into her thoughts. Sarah looked up at the man who had saved both their lives, the Lakota warrior whose kindness had defied everything she'd been taught to expect. "In my husband's family, it's tradition to name a child after the circumstances of their birth," she said, her voice hoarse from exertion. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. "Among my people as well, a birth name often tells a story." Sarah stroked her daughter's downy head. "Then I think I'll call her Hope, because that's what she is. Hope born in the wilderness, when all seemed lost." Matthew considered this, then offered a slight bow of approval. "A good name. In Lakota we would say Wachinyanpi." "Wachinyanpi," Sarah repeated carefully, testing the unfamiliar word. "What does it mean exactly?" "That in which we trust," Matthew translated. "That which does not disappoint." Outside their shelter, snow began falling again, silent and steady, covering their tracks and muffling all sound. Inside, the small family created by circumstance and compassion rested, gathering strength for the challenges that still lay ahead. Dawn broke with painful brightness against the fresh snow. Sarah woke from fitful sleep to find Matthew at the shelter's entrance, silently watching the forest. Her daughter, little Hope, slept peacefully against her chest, swaddled in layers of cloth. The night had been long and difficult. Sarah's fever had spiked again after the birth, leaving her drifting between consciousness and vivid dreams. Through it all, Matthew had maintained his vigil, periodically checking on both mother and child, administering more herbal remedies, and keeping the small fire burning just enough to ward off the mountain chill. "How is she?" he asked, noticing. Sarah was awake. "Breathing well," Sarah responded, gently touching her daughter's cheek. Despite being early, Hope showed remarkable resilience. Her color was good, and she had nursed twice during the night, a promising sign. "Thank you for everything." Matthew acknowledged her gratitude with a slight nod before returning to more practical matters. "We cannot stay here. You need Swift Deer's medicines, and the baby needs proper shelter." "I'm not sure I can travel yet," Sarah admitted. The mere thought of moving sent pain radiating through her exhausted body. "The soldiers have made camp by the smoke we saw yesterday," Matthew informed her. "They will begin searching again soon, if they find us here." He left the implication unspoken. Sarah understood the danger. A Lakota warrior with a stolen cavalry horse and a white woman with a newborn infant would raise dangerous questions. Questions that could lead to violence regardless of the truth. "How far to your camp now?" "On good trails, half a day," Matthew estimated. "Taking hidden paths with you and the baby, perhaps a full day if we move carefully." Looking down at Hope's peaceful face, Sarah made her decision. "Then we should go. While she's sleeping, I can manage." The determination in her voice seemed to both surprise and impress Matthew. He helped her prepare with the same quiet efficiency he'd shown throughout their journey, securing Hope in a makeshift sling that would keep her warm against Sarah's body, mixing a stronger batch of herbal medicine for pain, fashioning a more comfortable seat on Willow, using their remaining blankets. By mid-morning, they were moving slowly through the forest, Matthew leading Willow by the reins, while constantly scanning for signs of pursuit. Sarah focused all her energy on staying upright in the saddle, Hope secured firmly against her chest. The forest gave way to more rugged terrain where ancient rock slides had created fields of tumbled boulders partially covered by snow. Matthew guided them through this labyrinth with unwavering confidence, occasionally reaching up to steady Sarah when the path grew particularly challenging. "How do you know these hidden trails so well?" she asked during a brief rest, hoping conversation might distract her from the pain that accompanied each step Willow took. Matthew's expression softened slightly. "As a boy, I was too curious for my own good. While other children learned hunting and riding, I explored every canyon and ridge." A rare, distant smile touched his lips. "My mother called me the one who finds paths where others see only walls." "She sounds like a wise woman." "The wisest," he agreed. "When my father died and I returned from the missionary school, many thought I was lost between worlds. No longer. Fully Lakota, but never accepted as white. My mother saw differently. She said I had been given a gift, the ability to walk in both worlds and understand each." This glimpse into Matthew's past offered Sarah a new perspective on her guide. She had thought of him primarily as a warrior, but now saw the thoughtful boy he must have been, curious, intelligent, navigating between cultures even before adulthood. "And your grandfather?" she asked. "White Eagle?" Matthew's expression grew, more complex. "He fought against the Wasichu, the white settlers, in his youth, lost brothers and sons to their diseases and guns. His heart hardened." He glanced back at Sarah. "It may be difficult for him to welcome you." Before Sarah could respond, Hope began to fuss, her tiny face scrunching with hunger or discomfort. They paused long enough for Sarah to nurse her, finding shelter beneath an overhanging rock that kept the worst of the wind at bay. While the baby fed, Matthew disappeared briefly, returning with a handful of red berries. "For strength," he explained, offering them to Sarah. "The mother must eat well for the milk to be strong." The berries were tart, but surprisingly refreshing. As Sarah ate, Matthew kept watch, his posture alert to any sound beyond their small sanctuary. The bond forming between them transcended their different worlds, forged by shared danger and the innocent presence of the newborn who connected them. When they resumed their journey, the terrain began to change subtly. The forest grew thicker, with stands of lodgepole pines giving way to broader stretches of aspen and cottonwood. The land sloped gradually downward, and in the distance, Sarah glimpsed a river winding through the valley below, not yet frozen despite the early winter. "The singing waters," Matthew explained, following her gaze, "sacred to my people. They flow from a hot spring in the mountains and never freeze completely, even in the deepest winter." As they descended toward the valley floor, Matthew's demeanor changed. He moved with greater caution, frequently stopping to check for signs. Only he could read: a broken twig, disturbed snow, marks on trees that might have been made deliberately. "We are nearing the outer boundaries of my people's territory," he explained. Scouts watched these approaches. Sarah had assumed they would simply ride into the Lakota camp, perhaps facing some initial suspicion, but ultimately being accepted under Matthew's protection. Now she realized the situation was far more complex. For the Lakota, a white person approaching their hidden winter camp represented potential danger, regardless of circumstances. "What will happen when we're discovered?" she asked, her arms tightening. "Instinctively around hope. I will speak for you," Matthew assured her, "but we must be careful. The scouts may not recognize me immediately, and a warrior's first duty is to protect the camp." Even as he spoke, Matthew suddenly froze, his head tilted slightly, as if listening to something beyond Sarah's perception. Then, with deliberate movements, he raised both hands shoulder-high, palm outward, a universal gesture of peace. "Wichasha wang hinpaing," he called out in Lakota, his voice carrying through the trees. "Matthew, two hawks, ohiyaye." For several tense seconds, nothing happened. Then, as if materializing from the forest itself, two mounted warriors appeared on either side of their path. Both men carried rifles and wore expressions of guarded suspicion that shifted to surprise when they recognized Matthew. A rapid exchange in Lakota followed, too quick for Sarah to follow, even if she had understood the language. She caught only the occasional glance directed her way, some curious, others distinctly hostile. Hope, perhaps sensing the tension, began to whimper softly. Finally, one of the scouts, a younger man with a single eagle feather tied in his hair, turned his horse and disappeared into the forest, presumably to bring news to the main camp. The other remained, his dark eyes fixed warily on Sarah. "They will allow us to approach," Matthew told her, returning to English. "Grey Fox has gone ahead to inform the council." "And him?" Sarah nodded toward the remaining scout. "Running Elk will escort us. He is cautious about bringing a white woman to our winter camp." The diplomatic understatement was not lost on Sarah. Running Elk's expression suggested cautious was far too mild a term for his feelings on the matter. Their procession continued down into the valley, now led by Running Elk, whose occasional backward glances made it clear he considered himself a guard as much as a guide. Matthew walked beside Willow, occasionally speaking soft words of encouragement to Sarah when the path grew difficult. As they neared the valley floor, smoke from multiple fires became visible through the trees, thin grey columns rising straight in the still air. Sarah caught glimpses of conical structures, teepees arranged in a traditional circle with larger council lodges at the center. The camp was situated in a natural amphitheater created by low, wooded hills that provided protection from winter storms, while concealing its presence from distant observation. The nearby river provided water, while the surrounding forest offered fuel and game. It was, Sarah realized, a perfectly chosen location for a people seeking to maintain their traditional life away from government agents and military patrols. At the camp's edge, they were met by a delegation that had clearly been hastily assembled. Women paused in their work to stare. Children were quickly gathered by protective parents, and a group of older men emerged from what appeared to be a council lodge. Matthew dismounted and helped Sarah down from Willow, supporting her weight as her legs threatened to buckle. The birth, fever, and arduous journey had depleted her strength completely. Only her concern for Hope's safety kept her conscious. An elderly man stepped forward from the group. His face was deeply lined, his braided hair streaked with silver, and he carried himself with unmistakable authority. Around his neck hung an impressive necklace of bear claws, and his buckskin shirt was adorned with intricate beadwork that marked his status. "My grandfather," Matthew said quietly to Sarah, "White Eagle." The old man surveyed them with piercing dark eyes, his gaze lingering on Hope before returning to Matthew. He spoke a single phrase in Lakota, his tone demanding explanation. Matthew responded respectfully but firmly, occasionally gesturing to Sarah and the baby. Though she couldn't understand the words, Sarah recognized the cadence of formal speech, a younger man justifying his actions to respected elders. White Eagle listened without interruption, his expression revealing nothing. When Matthew finished, a tense silence fell over the gathering. Finally, the old man stepped closer, his eyes now fixed on Hope's tiny face, visible within her wrappings. With weathered hands that had likely held weapons against white settlers decades earlier, he gently pulled back the blanket to look more fully at the infant. Hope chose that moment to open her eyes, dark blue and unfocused, and wave one tiny fist in a gesture that could have been either protest or greeting. Something shifted in White Eagle's stern expression. He spoke again, this time with a different tone, and turned toward the camp. A middle-aged woman with a strong, handsome face stepped forward from the onlookers. The resemblance to Matthew was unmistakable. This must be his mother. "She says you and the child will come to her lodge," Matthew translated. "Swift Deer will attend to your fever and examine the baby." Sarah swayed on her feet, relief and exhaustion overwhelming her. "Your grandfather, what did he say?" Matthew supported her as they began walking slowly toward the camp, following his mother, who had already turned to lead the way. "He said that Wakantanka, the great mystery, sometimes sends strange gifts, and only a fool refuses to unwrap them to see what is inside." Matthew's mother's lodge stood near the center of the camp, its hide covering decorated with painted symbols that Sarah couldn't decipher. Inside, the space was surprisingly warm and comfortable, with buffalo robes covering the ground and a small fire burning in the central pit, its smoke rising through the open smoke flap above. "Sit here," Matthew's mother directed in accented but clear English, indicating a pile of soft furs near the fire. "You need warmth." Sarah sank gratefully onto the offered seat, her legs finally giving way after hours of forced endurance. Hope stirred against her chest, making small mewling sounds that indicated another feeding would soon be necessary. "My son says you carried this child through mountains after your people abandoned you," the older woman said, her direct gaze assessing Sarah with neither judgment nor sympathy, merely practical evaluation. "Yes," Sarah replied simply. Explanations seemed unnecessary. "I am Singing Bird," Matthew's mother introduced herself. "My son has a good heart, but sometimes acts before consulting. The council, bringing you here was dangerous." Before Sarah could respond, the lodge flap opened to admit an elderly woman whose deeply lined face and white-streaked braids suggested advanced age, though her movements remained spry and purposeful. She carried a woven bag from which various herbs protruded. "Swift Deer," Matthew explained from where he stood near the entrance. "Our medicine woman." The healer knelt beside Sarah without preamble, pressing experienced hands to her forehead and throat. Swift Deer spoke rapidly to Singing Bird, who translated. "She says the fever is strong, but not the killing kind. She asks to see the baby." Sarah carefully unwrapped Hope, revealing her tiny form. Despite being born early and in such difficult circumstances, the infant appeared remarkably resilient. Her skin had a healthy color, and her small limbs moved with surprising vigor when freed from the confining blankets. Swift Deer examined the newborn with gentle thoroughness, her weathered fingers checking the baby's pulse at neck and wrist, testing muscle tone, peering into her eyes and ears. Throughout the examination, she maintained a running commentary that Singing Bird only occasionally translated. She says the child is small but strong. Her spirit decided to come early because it sensed danger. Singing Bird paused, listening to more of Swift Deer's observations. The birth cord was tied properly. My son did this well. At this, Sarah glanced toward Matthew, who had maintained a respectful distance during the examination. His usual stoic expression betrayed a hint of pride at the medicine woman's approval of his emergency midwifery. Swift Deer reached into her medicine bag and began assembling various herbs and roots, grinding some in a small stone mortar, while setting others aside for brewing. The familiar motions reminded Sarah of Rebecca Miller's similar preparations during the wagon journey, women's healing knowledge that transcended cultural boundaries. "She will make medicine for your fever and to strengthen your milk," Singing Bird explained. "I will prepare food. You must eat to regain strength." While the women worked, Matthew stepped outside, presumably to speak with the council that would ultimately decide Sarah and Hope's fate. Despite the relative warmth and safety of the lodge, Sarah felt a stab of anxiety at his departure. He had become her anchor in this unfamiliar world. Singing Bird seemed to sense her unease. "My son will speak for you. White Eagle listens to him, though he does not always show it." "Your husband, Matthew's father, was he a council leader too?" Sarah asked, trying to understand the family dynamics. A shadow passed over Singing Bird's strong features. "He was Grey Wolf, war chief of our band. He died in the sickness that came after the first treaty signing." She stirred a pot of fragrant stew hanging over the fire. "The white doctor refused to treat our people, said there was not enough medicine for Indians." The stark reality of this statement hung in the air between them. Sarah thought of Wagon Master Daniels's similar calculation, the many over the few, with her designated as expendable. "I'm sorry," she said simply, knowing the inadequacy of the words, but offering them nonetheless. Singing Bird acknowledged this with a slight nod, then continued more pragmatically. "My son walks between worlds. At the missionary school he learned your people's ways. After his father died, he returned to learn ours. Now he uses both. As a scout for the army," Sarah ventured, recalling fragments of what Matthew had shared. "Sometimes this helps our people know where soldiers move, where it is safe to hunt." She gave Sarah an appraising look. "But he is never fully trusted by either world." To Lakota. "For white men, too knowledgeable of white ways for some here." This insight into Matthew's precarious position deepened Sarah's understanding of his character, his caution, his self-reliance, his ability to navigate difficult terrain, both literal and figurative. It also explained why he might have felt kinship with her own status as someone cast out and vulnerable. Swift Deer approached with a small wooden bowl containing a dark liquid. She gestured for Sarah to drink, her insistent expression requiring no translation. The medicine tasted bitter, but not unpleasant, with hints of mint and something resinous that reminded Sarah of pine sap. Hope began to cry in earnest, her tiny face reddening with hunger. As Sarah adjusted her clothing to nurse, she noticed both. Lakota women watching with approval. "A mother who feeds her child will not be turned away from our camp," Singing Bird stated, as if this settled an important question. "Even if she is Wasichu." The meal that followed was the most nourishing Sarah had eaten since Fort Laramie, a rich stew of venison and wild roots, accompanied by a kind of bread made from ground seeds and berries. As she ate, Sarah felt strength gradually returning to her depleted body, though the fever still burned beneath her skin. Outside, the camp's activities continued. Children's voices calling to one another, the rhythmic sound of women scraping hides, men's deeper tones in conversation. Normal life carrying on while decisions about her future were being made elsewhere. When Matthew finally returned, his expression was difficult to read. He exchanged words with his mother in Lakota before addressing Sarah directly. "The council has spoken," he said. "You and the child may remain until the spring thaw makes mountain travel possible again. Then a decision will be made about your next path." Relief flooded through Sarah. The immediate threat of being sent away had been lifted, giving her precious time to recover and for hope to grow stronger. "What convinced them?" she asked. "Many things." Matthew settled on a robe across the fire from her. A white eagle spoke of respecting the great mystery's strange paths. Swift deer said a newborn and mother cannot travel safely in winter. Others remembered the white woman doctor who came when we had sickness 2 winters ago. Singing Bird added something in Lakota that made Matthew's expression tighten slightly. "What did she say?" Sarah asked. Matthew hesitated before translating. "She said some believe that accepting you would bring trouble, but turning away a mother and child would bring greater trouble, bad medicine that would follow our people." Superstition or compassion, perhaps both, had granted her sanctuary. Sarah wasn't proud enough to question which had weighed more heavily in her favor. "There is one condition," Matthew continued. "You must contribute to the camp's needs as all do. My mother suggested you could help with the children, teaching them English words while the women work. This skill could be valuable in dealing with traders and agents." Of course, Sarah agreed immediately. Teaching was something she could do, even while recovering her strength. "I was trained as a teacher before I married." This news seemed to please Singing Bird, who nodded approvingly. "Good. Tomorrow you will meet the others. Tonight you rest." As darkness fell over the camp, the lodge took on a peaceful atmosphere. Swift Deer departed after leaving additional medicine and instructions for Sarah's care. Singing Bird prepared, sleeping robes on one side of the fire for Sarah and Hope, while she and Matthew would occupy the opposite side. The domestic arrangement struck Sarah as both strange and comforting. She was simultaneously an outsider and, at least temporarily, part of this family unit. As she settled Hope into a small cradle board that Singing Bird had produced from her stores, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. 3 days ago, she had been abandoned on a mountain trail, certain that death would claim both her and her unborn child. Now she lay in a Lakota lodge, her daughter born safely against all odds, with people she would once have feared now serving as her protectors. "Your daughter sleeps peacefully," Matthew observed, watching the babies. "Gentle breathing. She does not know she crosses between worlds. Perhaps that's for the best," Sarah replied softly. "She'll grow up knowing only what we teach her about those boundaries." Matthew considered this. "My grandfather says children are born without barriers. We build the walls for them, stone by stone, until they can no longer see across." The profound truth of this observation settled over Sarah as exhaustion finally claimed her. As she drifted towards sleep, warmed by the fire and the presence of others after so many nights of desolate fear, she wondered what kind of world Hope would inherit, and whether the walls between their peoples would ever truly fall. Outside, the first heavy snow of winter began to descend upon the Lakota camp, sealing them into their hidden valley until spring. For better or worse, Sarah Blackwell and her newborn daughter were now part of this community, their fates intertwined with the people who had offered shelter when her own kind had abandoned her to die. The days transformed into weeks as winter tightened its grip on the mountain valley. The Lakota camp settled into a rhythm of indoor activities, storytelling, craftwork, food preparation, that defined the season of snow and darkness. For Sarah, these weeks brought gradual healing, both physical and emotional. Swift Deer's medicines eventually broke her fever, while singing birds' nourishing food restored her strength. Hope grew steadily, her premature birth becoming less apparent with each passing day as she filled out into a healthy, alert infant whose dark eyes observed the world with growing curiosity. Sarah's integration into camp life progressed in small, measured steps. Initially, the other women maintained a cautious distance, watching her interactions with Singing Bird and Swift Deer before venturing their own tentative connections. Children proved less reserved, drawn by the novelty of her different appearance, and especially fascinated by Hope, who received more attention than any baby reasonably needed. As promised, Sarah began informal English lessons, gathering the camp's children in Singing Bird's lodge during the coldest part of the day. She taught them simple words and phrases that might be useful for trading, numbers, items to barter, basic greetings. The children, in turn, became her tutors in Lakota, giggling at her mispronunciations, but patiently correcting her attempts. 1 month after their arrival, Sarah sat by the central fire watching Hope, who now lay contentedly on a soft buffalo robe, batting at a small feathered toy Singing Bird had fashioned for her. Outside, a blizzard had been raging for 2 days, making the lodge's warmth even more precious. "She grows strong," White Eagle observed, entering the lodge with a blast of cold air. The elder had taken to making daily visits, ostensibly to speak with his daughter Singing Bird, but Sarah had noticed his increasing interest in Hope's development. Yes, Sarah agreed, still somewhat intimidated by Matthew's grandfather despite his gradually warming demeanor. "Swift Deer says she has caught up to her proper size now." White Eagle settled beside the fire, his aged joints clearly appreciating the warmth. He studied Hope with the same intense focus he brought to council deliberations. "In our way, a child, born in difficult circumstances, is marked for an important path," he said, speaking directly to Sarah rather than through a translator, as he often did. The spirits tested her strength immediately. "And mine," Sarah added with a small smile. White Eagle acknowledged this with a slight nod. "My grandson was right to bring you here, though I did not say so at the time." This admission clearly cost the proud elder some effort. "A child needs community to thrive. One person alone cannot provide everything." This wisdom resonated with Sarah, who had observed how the Lakota children were raised, not just by parents, but by an extended network of relatives and clan members, each contributing to their upbringing. Hope already had several aunties who would sweep her up for cuddles when Sarah was busy with her teaching duties. "In your world," White Eagle continued, "how would this child be seen? Born of white parents, but in Lakota lands, delivered by Lakota hands." The question carried layers of significance that Sarah hadn't fully considered. "She would be seen as white," she answered honestly. "Your world and mine draw the lines differently." White Eagle's weathered face revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Lines, always lines." He gestured to Hope. "She does not see them yet." Their conversation was interrupted as Matthew entered, bringing with him another swirl of snow and wind. He had been away for 3 days, hunting with a party of younger men, despite the challenging weather. "The storm breaks tomorrow," he announced, warming his hands by the fire. "We were successful, 4 elk and a black bear that was not yet fully sleeping for winter." This news lightened the mood in the lodge. Fresh meat would be welcome after weeks of relying primarily on preserved stores. Even White Eagle's stern countenance softened slightly at the prospect of fresh elk meat. As the elder departed to spread the good news, Matthew settled across from Sarah, his eyes drawn to Hope, as always. The baby, recognizing a favorite person, kicked her legs excitedly and made the gurgling sounds that were her current form of communication. "She knows your voice," Sarah observed. She remembers who helped her enter this world, Matthew corrected, his usual solemnity briefly replaced by something approaching pride. During the weeks in camp, Matthew had maintained a certain distance, respectful, protective, but rarely allowing the kind of personal connection that had formed during their journey through the mountains. Sarah understood this retreat. In the camp, he had responsibilities, a position to maintain. Their unusual bond needed to be carefully navigated in the context of his community. Yet in quiet moments like this, with only hope as witness, something of their shared experience would surface, a mutual recognition of the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them together. "White Eagle has been asking about her future," Sarah said, watching Matthew's reaction closely. "He questions many things lately," Matthew replied carefully. "The Spring Council will soon discuss whether to accept the Indian agent's offer of reserved land near Fort Bridger. Some, like my grandfather, resist. Others see little choice." This was the first Sarah had heard of such negotiations, though she had gathered from snippets of translated conversations that the band faced difficult decisions. Their current winter camp, while well hidden and abundant with game, lay outside the territories officially allocated to the Lakota in the most recent treaty. "What happens to places like this valley if they accept reservation land?" she asked. Matthew's expression darkened. "They become open for white settlement. Mining companies have already found gold in the eastern ridges. Timbermen want the forests." The complexity of the situation struck Sarah anew. This peaceful valley, her sanctuary, was itself contested ground, part of the ever-shrinking territories where the Lakota could maintain their traditional ways. "And what do you think should be done?" she ventured, sensing his inner conflict. Matthew stared into the fire, flames reflecting in his dark eyes. "My mind understands what the agent offers: safety, rations, protection from settlers. My heart sees what we would lose: freedom, dignity, the old ways." He looked up at her directly. "I have seen both worlds, Sarah. Neither has all the answers." The use of her first name, rare for Matthew, who typically avoided such personal address, underscored the significance of this confidence. He was sharing not just information, but his deepest uncertainties. Hope chose that moment to fuss, hungry after her play session. As Sarah lifted the baby to nurse, Matthew respectfully averted his eyes, rising to help Singing Bird, who had entered, carrying supplies for the evening meal. The domestic scene that followed, mother and child by the fire, Matthew and Singing Bird preparing food, occasional visitors bringing news or borrowing items, had become comfortingly familiar over the weeks. Sometimes Sarah would catch herself forgetting the temporary nature of this arrangement, imagining Hope growing up among these people, learning both worlds as Matthew had. Such thoughts always brought a pang of reality. Spring would eventually come, bringing with it the council's decision about her future. The Caravan had long since reached Oregon territory, and somewhere there, Thomas's cousin might still be waiting to receive the family that had been promised. The wider world beyond these mountains had not disappeared during her winter seclusion. That evening, after Hope had been settled in her cradleboard and the lodge had grown quiet with approaching sleep, Sarah found herself unable to rest. Something in Matthew's description of the impending reservation decision had unsettled her, a reminder that all sanctuaries, however secure they might seem, eventually faced external pressures. She rose quietly and moved to the lodge entrance, lifting the flap slightly to look outside. The storm had indeed begun to subside, moonlight occasionally breaking through thinning clouds to illuminate the snow-covered camp. Smoke rose from lodge tops in straight columns, suggesting the wind had finally calmed. "You should be resting." Matthew's voice came softly from behind her. "I was thinking about spring," she admitted, letting the flap fall closed, "about what happens when the snow melts." Matthew moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cooler air near the entrance. "Many paths will open," he said, "some leading back to your world, some to new places." "And hope?" Sarah asked, giving voice to her deepest concern. "Where is her place? She was born between worlds, as you said." Matthew was silent for a long moment, weighing his words carefully as was his way. "There is a story among my people," he began finally, "of a great medicine man who dreamed of a time when our children and the white children would play together without seeing differences. Many laughed at his vision, but others remembered the ancient prophecies that speak of circles closing, of separated peoples finding common ground again. He guided her back toward the fire's dying embers, which cast just enough light to see his earnest expression. "I do not know where hope's path leads, but I believe her birth in our lands under these circumstances carries meaning beyond what we can see now." His voice lowered further. "My grandfather believes this too, though he would not say so directly." This revelation surprised Sarah. White Eagle had seemed the least likely to attach spiritual significance to a white woman's child. "Is that why he visits so often?" Matthew nodded. "He watches for signs. The old ones believe children born between worlds sometimes carry messages between them." The responsibility implicit in this idea felt simultaneously overwhelming and oddly affirming. Hope's difficult entry into the world might carry purpose beyond mere survival. As Sarah returned to her sleeping robes, she found herself contemplating what it meant to be born between worlds. Perhaps the true gift of Hope's unusual birth was the opportunity to see beyond the artificial boundaries adults created, to recognize that the Lakota lodge and the Oregon homestead her parents had envisioned were simply different expressions of the same human desire for safety, community, and belonging. Outside, the storm finally broke completely, stars appearing between dissolving clouds. Inside, mother and child slept peacefully under the protective watch of those who had once been strangers, but now formed the closest thing to family Sarah had known since losing Thomas. The future remained uncertain, but tonight, at least, they were home. February brought the deepest cold, days when breath froze into crystalline clouds, and even brief exposure to the air outside could numb exposed skin within minutes. Yet within this frozen landscape, life in the Lakota camp continued with remarkable vibrancy. The successful hunt had provided not just meat, but materials: hides for new clothing, sinew for sewing, bones for tools and ceremonial items. Sarah found herself drawn into the women's work circles, her initial role as observer gradually shifting to participant as she learned to scrape hides, render fat, and preserve meat using techniques perfected over countless generations. The repetitive nature of the tasks created space for conversation, and it was during these work sessions that she began to truly know the women of the camp beyond superficial interactions. Morning Star, a young woman close to Sarah's age with a toddler son, became a particular friend. Her quick laugh and curious nature made her an eager student of English words while helping Sarah improve her still rudimentary Lakota. "Your hands are becoming Lakota hands," Morningstar observed one afternoon as they worked together on a deerskin. "Not soft like when you came." Sarah examined her calloused palms with rueful pride. "They're certainly not a lady's hands anymore." The comment prompted Morningstar to ask about white women's lives, their daily activities, expectations, and especially their relationships with men. Her frank curiosity about marriage customs led to conversations that had both women alternating between laughter and sober reflection. "In your world, a woman stays with one man even if he treats her badly?" Morningstar asked, genuinely perplexed by the concept of irrevocable marriage. "Not all men treat their wives badly," Sarah clarified. "Thomas, my husband, was kind and respectful, but yes, marriage is meant to be forever. Here, a woman can put a man's belongings outside the lodge if he becomes cruel or lazy, Morningstar explained. Her brothers will support her decision. This keeps men mindful of how they behave. Such conversations revealed fundamental differences in how their societies approach gender relations, property, child-rearing, and countless other aspects of daily life. Sarah found herself questioning assumptions she had never before examined, seeing her own culture through new eyes. Hope thrived amid this communal environment. Now 3 months old, she had developed into a remarkably social baby, content to be passed among various aunties who doted on her while Sarah worked or taught. Her dark hair had grown thicker, curling slightly at the ends, and her eyes had settled into a deep brown that many in the camp took as a sign she belonged among them despite her pale skin. On a particularly bitter February evening, as families gathered in the larger council lodge for storytelling, Sarah noticed a subtle change in the camp's atmosphere. Messages had arrived earlier that day, brought by a group of hunters who had encountered another Lakota band near the eastern valleys. Whatever news they carried had created an undercurrent of tension that manifested in whispered conversations and concerned glances. Matthew had been absent for most of the day, closeted with White Eagle and other council members. When he finally joined the storytelling gathering, his expression was guarded, the lines around his eyes deeper than usual. He settled beside Sarah, nodding greeting to Hope, who was already reaching for him with enthusiastic recognition. Despite his obvious preoccupation, Matthew took the baby with practiced ease, balancing her on his knee while she grabbed at the leather fringe decorating his shirt. "Something's happened," Sarah said quietly, pitching her voice beneath the elders' storytelling that had captivated the gathered children. "The whole camp feels it." Matthew hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share. "Soldiers have established a new outpost 3 valleys east of here," he finally revealed. "They claim to be protecting the new stage route, but their patrols push deeper into hunting territories than necessary." The implications were clear. Their hidden valley, secure throughout the winter, might not remain so as spring approached and military activities increased. "Is there immediate danger?" Sarah asked, instinctively drawing closer to Hope. "Not while snow blocks the higher passes," Matthew assured her. "But the council must decide soon whether to move the camp before the spring thaw or remain and risk discovery." As the storyteller's voice rose dramatically, describing how Coyote tricked the thunder spirits, children gasped and laughed in response. The contrast between their innocent enjoyment and the adults' underlying concerns struck Sarah forcefully. "What would discovery mean?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Forced relocation. Soldiers do not recognize our right to be here, despite what the treaties say about unceded hunting grounds." His jaw tightened. Other bands who resisted were driven out at gunpoint, their lodges burned to prevent return. The harshness of this reality settled like a physical weight. For months, the valley had represented safety, a protected space where both she and Hope could heal and grow stronger. The thought of armed men disrupting this peace, potentially bringing violence to people who had shown her nothing but kindness, was unbearable. "Could my presence help?" she suggested. "If soldiers came, I could explain—" "No," Matthew interrupted, more forcefully than his usual measured tone. "If soldiers find a white woman living among us, they will assume captivity, regardless of the truth. Such misunderstanding would only make things worse." Hope, sensing the tension, began to fuss. Matthew immediately adjusted his hold, bouncing her gently until she settled again. The tenderness of this interaction contrasted sharply with the harsh realities they were discussing. "Then what options remain?" Sarah pressed. "The council considers 3 paths," Matthew explained. Move deeper into the mountains where no soldiers will follow, accept the Indian agent's offer of reservation land, or split the band, sending elders and children to the reservation while warriors maintain the old hunting grounds as long as possible. Each option carried significant costs. Deeper mountain retreats meant harsher conditions and less game. Reservation life meant dependence on government rations and the loss of traditional freedoms. Splitting the band would fracture families and cultural continuity. And White Eagle, what does he advise? My grandfather remembers too many broken promises to trust the reservation offer. A hint of pride entered Matthew's voice. He favors moving deeper into ancestral lands, maintaining our ways until better solutions emerge. The evening storytelling concluded with a traditional song, voices joining in harmony that transcended Sarah's inability to understand all the words. Hope had fallen asleep against Matthew's chest, her small face peaceful in complete contrast to the difficult decisions facing the adults who surrounded her. As families began returning to their individual lodges, White Eagle approached where Sarah and Matthew sat. For a long moment, the elder simply observed Hope sleeping in his grandson's arms, his weathered face revealing an unusual softness. The child grows stronger each day, he noted in English, deliberately including Sarah in the conversation. Soon she will need her naming ceremony. This unexpected statement caught Sarah by surprise. Naming ceremonies were significant cultural events among the Lakota, typically held when a child demonstrated their unique character or after notable achievements. But she already has a name, Sarah responded carefully. Hope. White Eagle nodded. She carries your word for what she brought into your heart. This is good. But among our people, children receive names that guide their path forward, that connect them to the spirits who will watch over them. The elder's proposal represented something profound, a recognition of Hope's unique position between cultures and an offer to provide her with protection within Lakota spiritual traditions. Sarah found herself deeply moved by the gesture, especially coming from White Eagle, who had initially been the most reserved about her presence. When would this happen? She asked, accepting the offer with this simple question. After the council decides our spring path, White Eagle replied. Before new journeys begin, the child should receive her Lakota name. With that cryptic statement, he departed, leaving Sarah and Matthew to consider its implications. The naming ceremony represented a significant spiritual commitment, one that would bind Hope to the Lakota people regardless of where her future physical path might lead. He honors you with this offer, Matthew said quietly as they walked back towards Singing Bird's lodge, Hope still sleeping peacefully in his arms. My grandfather rarely extends such recognition to outsiders. I'm grateful, Sarah replied sincerely. But I'm also confused. Why now? When decisions about leaving this place are being made, when spring might separate us. Matthew considered this as they entered the lodge, where Singing Bird was already preparing the evening fire. He carefully placed Hope in her cradle, bored before answering, perhaps because separation of bodies does not necessarily mean separation of spirits, he suggested. A Lakota name creates a connection that distance cannot break. As Sarah prepared for sleep that night, Hope nestled securely beside her. She contemplated the intertwining paths that had brought them to this moment. The trail of hardship that began with Thomas's death and continued through her abandonment by the Caravan had somehow led to this place of unexpected belonging. Whatever the council decided about the camp's future, whatever spring might bring for her and Hope, something profound and irrevocable had occurred during these winter months. Boundaries had blurred, assumptions had been challenged, and new possibilities had emerged that neither culture alone might have created. Outside, the winter stars burned with cold clarity in the night sky, their ancient light connecting all peoples who had ever looked upward in wonder. Inside the lodge, mother and child slept in the secure warmth of a community that had once been foreign, but now felt increasingly like home. A complicated, imperfect, but genuine home at the crossroads of colliding worlds. The first signs of spring emerged gradually, a softening of the snow crust, longer daylight hours, the occasional brave bird returning early from southern migrations. With these subtle changes came a shift in the camp's energy, as winter's enforced stillness gave way to preparations for the decisions that could no longer be postponed. Hope's naming ceremony occurred during this transition time, on a clear March day when the sun's growing strength had created the first patches of exposed earth around the camp. White Eagle had chosen the timing deliberately, explaining through Matthew that the ceremony should happen when the earth shows its face again, but before the great thaw brings change to all paths. The entire camp gathered for the occasion, forming a circle in the central area where winter snows had been packed down by months of foot traffic. Sarah sat with Hope on a special buffalo robe, the baby now nearly 4 months old, alert and curious about the unusual activity surrounding. Her swift deer had helped Sarah prepare properly, showing her how to dress Hope in a small ceremonial outfit that the women had created specifically for this purpose. Soft deerskin decorated with quill work and tiny blue beads that had been precious trade items saved for special occasions. White Eagle entered the circle carrying an intricately carved pipe, its stem decorated with eagle feathers and horsehair. The elder had painted his face with ceremonial markings, and he wore the full regalia of his position as a respected spiritual leader. The camp fell silent as he began the ceremony, speaking in Lakota, while Matthew quietly translated the key elements for Sarah's understanding. "Today we acknowledge this child born between worlds," White Eagle intoned, raising the pipe toward the 4 directions before lighting it. "The spirits guided her to our fire when the winter was young. Now we give her a name to carry on her path when spring brings new journeys." The elder approached Sarah and Hope, studying the baby with intense focus as she gazed back at him with equal curiosity. For several minutes, White Eagle simply observed her, occasionally blowing a small puff of sacred smoke toward her while murmuring prayers too quiet for others to hear. Then, with ceremonial deliberation, he placed his hand gently on Hope's head. "This child will be known among our people as Wichang Jpi King Ingyang Mani, walks among stars." Matthew leaned close to Sarah, translating the significance. "It is a powerful name, suggesting one who bridges worlds, earth and sky, seen and unseen, like she bridges our 2 peoples," Sarah whispered, understanding the profound honor being bestowed. White Eagle continued, his voice rising so all could hear. "As she carries this name, our spirits will recognize and protect her, wherever her path leads. She belongs to 2 worlds, but will never be lost in either." The ceremony concluded with members of the community coming forward to acknowledge Hope's Lakota name, each offering a small gift, a tiny moccasin, a beaded amulet, a special stone, items that represented protection and connection. Even running. Elk, who had initially been most suspicious of Sarah's presence, approached to place a small eagle feather beside Hope, a gesture of remarkable respect. As the gathering dispersed, White Eagle remained behind to speak privately with Sarah and Matthew. His ceremonial solemnity softened slightly as Hope reached for his finger, grasping it with surprising strength. "The council has made its decision," he announced without preamble. "When the moon is full again, our people will divide their paths. The elderly, the very young, and those who choose security will go to the reservation lands. Others will move deeper into the mountains, to valleys, where soldiers rarely venture. This split represented the compromise Sarah had known was coming, yet hearing it finalized still brought a pang of sadness for the community that had sheltered her through the winter. "And you, grandfather?" Matthew asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I go to the mountains," White Eagle stated simply. "I am too old to learn new ways." The elder's gaze shifted to Sarah, studying her with the same intensity he had shown Hope during the ceremony. "Now you also must decide your path, woman who came from the snow." The moment Sarah had both anticipated and dreaded had arrived. Throughout the winter, as she had gradually recovered her strength and Hope had grown healthy and strong, the question of spring had hovered in the background of her thoughts. Now it demanded an answer. "I have family waiting in Oregon Territory," she said, the words feeling strangely distant, as if speaking of someone else's life. "My husband's cousin expected us last fall." White Eagle nodded, unsurprised. "When the pass is clear, Matthew will guide you there safely." He looked down at Hope once more. "Wichang Pi King Ingyang Mani will carry our protection. With her, she will not forget where she first touched the earth." With that pronouncement, the elder departed, leaving Sarah and Matthew alone with Hope and the weight of impending separation. "Would your mother go to the reservation?" Sarah asked, needing to understand where all the people who had become important to her would be. "Yes," Matthew confirmed. "She believes the younger children need education in both worlds to survive." What is coming? Swift Deer will also go to care for those who become sick from the white man's diseases that often follow such moves. The logistics of the upcoming separation occupied the camp for the next 2 weeks, inventorying supplies, deciding which belongings to take and which to cache for later retrieval, preparing travois and pack arrangements for the different destinations. Sarah found herself helping Morning Star, who had decided to join those going to the reservation for her young son's sake. "Will you come visit us there?" Morning Star asked as they worked together for perhaps the last time. The agent allows some white visitors. "I'll try," Sarah promised, though she had no idea if such a journey would be possible once she reached Oregon. The distance would be vast, the difficulties considerable. As the full moon approached, Matthew took Sarah aside one evening after Hope had fallen asleep. "We should leave before the others," he suggested. "The mountain passes will be muddy, but passable now. If we wait longer, spring floods will make river crossings dangerous." The practical considerations couldn't disguise what they both felt, a reluctance to address the deeper implications of this journey. Throughout the winter, their relationship had existed in a suspended state, neither fully acknowledged nor denied. Now, with separation approaching, unspoken questions hung between them. "How long to reach Oregon?" Sarah asked, focusing on practicalities. 3 weeks, perhaps 4, depending on conditions, Matthew estimated. "We would follow the southern route, avoiding both military outposts and the main emigrant trails, where questions might be asked." Sarah nodded, appreciating his foresight. A white woman traveling with a Lakota man would attract unwanted attention on established routes. "When should we leave?" 2 days from now. I've already spoken with my mother and grandfather. They understand." The preparations passed in a blur of activity, gathering supplies, selecting which of Sarah's few possessions would make the journey, creating a secure carrying arrangement for Hope. Singing Bird and the other women provided gifts of food, medicine, and baby items that would ease their travel. On their final evening in camp, a small farewell gathering was held in Singing Bird's lodge. White Eagle presented Sarah with a medicine bundle, a small leather pouch containing sacred items meant to protect travelers, while Swift Deer gave final instructions for Hope's care during the journey. "She is Lakota now, as well as white," the medicine woman reminded Sarah. "Speak to her of both worlds as she grows." Morning Star pressed a beautifully beaded belt into Sarah's hands. "To remember your Lakota sisters," she explained, fighting tears. The women had grown close during their months of working together, sharing stories, laughter, and the universal experiences of motherhood across their cultural differences. When dawn arrived on their departure day, Sarah was surprised to find the entire camp assembled to see them off. Each family offered a brief blessing or good wish as she passed with Hope secured in her special carrier. Matthew led Willow, now loaded with their essential supplies, waiting patiently at the camp's edge. White Eagle stood apart from the others, his tall figure silhouetted against the rising sun. He spoke briefly to Matthew in Lakota, words too low for Sarah to hear, before turning to her. "You came to us as a stranger from the snow," the elder said, his deep voice carrying to those assembled. "You leave as family under the spring sun. This is the way of the sacred hoop, always closing even when it seems to break." He touched Hope's head one final time. "Wichang Peking Ingyang Mani will remember." With these words of blessing, Sarah and Matthew began their journey, following a different path than the one that had brought them to the valley months before. Hope, secure against her mother's chest, watched the changing landscape with bright, curious eyes. They traveled in companionable silence for the first few hours, each absorbed in private thoughts about what lay ahead. When they reached a high ridge overlooking the valley, Matthew halted Willow and gestured for Sarah to look back. Below, the Lakota camp was already beginning its own preparations for departure. Teepees being dismantled, horses gathered, the ordered community that had sheltered them through winter now transforming into separate traveling groups. "They have been my people for my entire life," Matthew said quietly, "yet sometimes I have felt caught between worlds, belonging fully to neither." Sarah understood then that this journey represented something profound for Matthew too, a choice. To escort her to a world where he would be seen as an outsider, potentially unwelcome or even in danger. "Why are you doing this?" she asked directly. "You could stay with your grandfather, go deeper into the mountains." Matthew's gaze remained on the distant camp for a long moment before shifting to Hope, who had fallen asleep against Sarah's chest. "There are many kinds of promises," he said finally. "Some spoken, some not. When I found you in the snow, when I helped bring this little one into the world." He paused, searching for the right words. A connection was formed that cannot be broken by distance or different paths. He turned Willow away from the overlook, facing the trail that stretched before them, through forests beginning to show the first green buds of spring. "Besides," he added with the hint of a smile, "which Hang Peking Ingyang Mani may need someone to teach her Lakota ways as she grows." The implication in this simple statement, that their journey together might not end at Oregon's border, created a flutter of possibilities in Sarah's heart. The path ahead remained uncertain, filled with challenges neither could fully anticipate. But as they descended into the new valley, Hope rode with them. Not just the child who carried that name, but the shared belief that boundaries between worlds could sometimes be crossed in both directions. Behind them, the winter valley of Sanctuary receded into memory. Ahead, spring unveiled new landscapes with each passing mile. Between these seasons of ending and beginning, Sarah Blackwell and Matthew Two Hawks continued forward, carrying precious hope, Wichang Pi King Ingyang Mani, toward a future that would be written not by the separations of their different peoples, but by the connections they had forged against all odds in the shadow of the mountains. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.
Your voice tomorrow clears up a bit. What's up? Now I can feel. No! Oh my God! Don't even feel bad at all. Please shut down your computer. Shut down. You lurk so much. Please. Shut down that computer. Go rest. Don't even worry about it. Please. Okay. So realistically speaking, I don't know if we're going to get through all of this tonight. Um, I would love to get to the 46 rows. Would love to. Also, we are expected to get, oh, we got light rain today? Did we? Oh, wow. Also, it's going to get really warm really quickly. That's crazy. It's going to be the 60s this weekend. Wow. It's going to be really nice temps. Being realistic is overrated. I mean, I agree. And of course, my audio goes to shit. I'm gonna put these in here, and we're gonna switch over to my headset, or not headset, my headphones. Hopefully, it lets me. Okay. I almost thought I had a hair in my eye.